Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Mga minamahal naming tagapakinig ng Radyo Balintataw. Ngayong buwan ng Pebrero, ginugunita po natin ang EDSA. Ang nakatala sa UNESCO Memory of the World, kung saan ang kagitingan ng mga kababayan natin ay naging inspirasyon para may mga demokrasya pang nabuhay dahil ito ang mapayapang pagtakwil sa diktadorya na naging maningning na halimbawa sa mundo. At ang mahalaga po ay pag-usapan natin ang kasaysayan. Marami pong mga trolls, marami pong mga social media platforms na sinasabi hindi totoong may nakaw na yaman sa bayan ang diktadorya. At ang mahalaga po, ang sinasabi natin ay magkaroon ng tunay na pagsasaliksik sa katotohanan. At para po higit na mailahad ang katotohanan, mapag-aralan yaan, meron po tayong mga natatanging panauhin na sila ang maaari po talagang magbigay ng salaysay tungkol sa integridad ng kasaysayan. Kasama po natin si Charlie Avila, Batikan, kilalang committed social action leader, sinusulong ang karapatan ng mga magsasaka, ng mga trabahador. At siya po, masasabi ko, kasama sa research team ng NAM na pinamunuan naman ng aking yumaong kabiyak. Si Charlie Avila siguro ngayon na lang ang ilan o baka siya na lang ang buhay na maaari talagang maging living witness kung ano ang nangyari, kung paano sinaliksik yung pinagtago-tago nila kanya hidden billions ngunit na bulgar din. At hindi masasabing hindi totoo dahil meron ng mga bumalik na yaman, marami pa pong nakatago. At sana nga ang ating pakiusap sa paghihirap ng bayan, ng buong mundo, ibalik na yan dahil makakatulong talaga para maibsan ang dalamhati ng ating bansa. Ngayon, kasama rin po natin ang isang kilala at batikan na history professor, history writer. Nagtuturo po siya sa Lasal at hindi lang po yun, nababasa niyo po siya sa Manila Times at madalas po ay nakikita niyo rin po sa telebisyon o sa radyo o sa social media. Napakahalaga po na ating pong ipagtanggol ang integridad ng kasaysayan. So, uumpisahan po natin sa kanilang pagbati kung anong nais nilang sabihin dito sa ating mahalagang katungkulan na huwag magpataw ng amnesia sa ating bayan. Hindi po pwedeng bigyan na lang ng limot at hindi tayo huhugot ng aral. Lalo na ngayon, nahaharapin natin ang napakahalagang katungkulan ng ating mamamayan, ang paggamit ng sagradong balota para mapayapa po nating maihalal ang mga tapat at alam po nating tunay na maglilingkod sa bayan. Okay? So, dito sabihin natin from youth to the elder. So yung history young person, si Xiao Chua muna, babate at magbibigay ng kanyang kahalagahan sa ganitong usapan. Pagkatapos, siyempre, ang senior na talagang hanggang ngayon ay walang tigil sa paglilingkod bayan, si Charlie Avila.
Ayan, makasaysayang araw po sa inyong lahat, ano? Ma'am Cecile, At syempre, ako po ang tunay kong pangalan, Michael Charleston. Ano? Kaya masayaw ako nakasama natin si Sir Charles Avila. No? At sumasaludo rin ako sa kanya kasi bilang isang scholar ng martial law, nabasa ko po ang kanyang mga nagawa sa bayan, no? Nung pakikibaka laban sa diktadura. At isa nga siya sa mga nagbibigay liwanag dito ng maayos kasi nabasa ko yung isang artikulo niya kung paano ba nakuha ni Marcos yung kanyang kayamanan, no? So, mahalaga po yung discussion natin, no, mga kababayan, dito sa ngayong araw na ito. Sapagkat kung titingnan po natin sa mga social media, ay mayroon pong mga paliwanag na nagsasabi nga na hindi ill-gotten. Kasi alam natin sa matagal na panahon, pinag-aralan sa paaralan, nakita natin na ill-gotten wealth. Kumbaga, hindi sumasapat sa kita ng isang Pangulo ng Pilipinas sa loob ng 20 taon at ng kanyang pamilya at ng kanyang mga cronies, yung wealth na kanilang na-acquire, which amounted to, according to the Presidential Commission on Good Government, $10 billion. Napakarami pong pera nun. Hindi ho siya 10 billion pesos. $10 billion po yan. At ito po ang makikita natin. Binawi po yan. Binabawi po yan ng pamahalaan. Hindi ho totoong walang mga kasong nanalo. May mga kasong nanalo dyan. At may mga pamahalaan din na nag-surrender. No, ng mga idineposito sa kanila. Isang halimbawa dyan, kung hindi ako nagkakauna, sana tama yung aking numero, $680 million mula sa Switzerland, Swiss banks. No? Gayon din, may mga assets din na isinauli yung mga tinatawag nating cronies at yung mga sinequester o kinuha ng pamahalaan na inangkin ng mga pamilya Marcos at ng kanyang crony. So yun po ang ngayon, syempre, dahil nandyan na ho yung isyong yan, and in fact, kapag nagkaroon ng mga litigation, pag nagkaroon ng mga kaso, in fact, kine-claim po ng mga Marcos yung mga deposito, no, na kinukuha ng pamahalaan. So sinasabi ho nila, kanila ho yun. At may statement nga si Imelda Marcos noong 1990s na sinabi niya na, I am not aware of the extent of my wealth. That's how rich we are. So parang ang dating, inaamin na ho nila na mayaman po sila. So paano nga yun? Abogado lamang si Marcos. Bagamat na siya'y dekalibreng abogado noon. At sa naging senador. Bakit ho dumami ng ganun yung pera nila? No? Yun yung mapapaliwanag sa atin. Kasi ngayon, bago ipasa ko kay Sir Charlie, kasi mas mahalaga yung sasabihin niya, gusto kong ilay yung groundwork na sa social media ngayon, may iba-iba ng paliwanag tungkol sa kung paano niya yan nakuha. No? Kasi nabanggit dun sa favorite article ko ni Sir Charlie na yung laging kinikwento ni Imelda na si Imelda Marcos daw ay dinala pagkatapos siyang ligawan at pakasalan, pag-uwi ng Baguio, dinala sa isang bank vault. At yung unang kwento, pera yung pinakita. Ngayon, eventually, naging ginto na yung pinakita. Isang buong praso daw ng ginto. So, nag-iba yung kwento. Na, yan ay evident, Sir Charlie, no? Tita Cecile, Ma'am Cecile, doon sa tinatawag natin na pag-iiba-iba rin ng version na nagkaroon na Yamashita treasure daw na hanap ni Marcos bago siya naging presidente. Nandyan yung binigyan daw siya ng gold ng mga Nazis from the Vatican to Jose Antonio Diaz na sabi ko nga kapag nakita nyo sa akin si Father Jose Antonio Diaz, ako nang tatapos sa kanya. No? Ngayon din, meron ding nagsabi na ngayon yung dati Italiano, wala naman dating
Italiano gold daw.
Walang gold dati yun. Ang sinasabi lang, kanila ang Pilipinas, may titulo sila. Tapos ngayon, biglang nagkaroon na sila ng gold, naging abogado nila si Marcos, kaya binigay yung gold sa kanya, tumulong na naman si Jose Antonio Diaz, at si Rizal pala'y hindi namatay, dahil si Jose Antonio Diaz, si Rizal pala'y naging si Jose Antonio Diaz, at siya'y nagbigay ng pera mismo sa Pangulong Marcos. So, these fantastic stories, na the more fantastic it is, the more na we cannot believe it, pero the more na mas pinaniniwalahan. And I believe that the political climate has something to do with it. The frustrations with democracy has something to do with it. Pero we have to learn yung facts na nakuha natin based on the researches of people like Sir Charlie na talagang sinuyod itong mga impormasyon ukol dito. At yan ang excited akong mapakinggan ng ating mga kababayan ngayong araw na ito.
Salamat sa pagbibigay mo ng plataforma, ano? Kasi yung mga kababalaghan na kwento, yung mga panlilinlang na kwento, sana ay dito maunawaan ng ating mga mamamayan. Kaya mabuti po nandito si Charlie Avila. Matagal po ang pagsasaliksik. Marami silang mga teams kung saan-saan pa nagpunta. Pakinggan po natin si Charlie at malalaman ninyo ang katotohanan. Charlie.
Maraming salamat po, Cecile. Maraming salamat, kaibigan Xiao. Mayroon po akong nihanda na presentation, mga 30-35 minutes. Kung papayagan ninyo ako, I will share screen. So actually, ang title, Authoritarianism, Folk Plunder in the Marcos Era. The poet said, "In the beginning is my end." Today we might reverse the line. At the end, we see the beginning. Was there any science or system to the Marcos art of plundering the sovereign wealth of his nation? The late Jovito Salonga said that indeed there was. After gazing for years at the incredible, itong sinabi ni Salonga, summing up the Marcos techniques, he established dictatorship to create monopolies and put them under the control of cronies, awarded behest loans to cronies from government banking or financing institutions, forced takeovers of various public and private enterprises without a nominal amount, with a nominal amount as payment, direct raiding of the public treasury and government financing institutions, issuance of presidential decrees or orders enabling cronies to amass wealth, kickbacks and commissions from enterprises doing business in the Philippines, the use of shell corporations and dummy companies to launder money overseas, skimming off of foreign aid and other forms of international assistance, and hiding wealth in overseas bank accounts using pseudonyms or code names. So it is good to be reminded that Marcos did not come from a rich family, and that he made his first million as a first-term congressman selling import licenses in 1949 and 1950. He bought a Cadillac to celebrate his new status. Before then, there was no outward indication of any wealth. When Marcos courted Imelda, tulad ng nabanggit nyo kanina, in 1954, the story goes that he brought her to a bank vault and showed her stacks of $100 bills, but no gold bars. Actually, there is no evidence that he had a bank account abroad, not until 1967. But in 1988 and thereafter, the Marcoses decided to talk like it was settled doctrine that he had begun accumulating gold toward the end of the war. Because we know during the middle part of 1942, the tide of battle began to turn. Japan was losing. Any planned movement of treasure back to Japan had to change, if only as a temporary measure. Why? Where did the treasure come from? When the Japanese Imperial Army rolled victorious through Asia, it systematically pillaged its country, shipping raw materials to Japan to further the war effort. What is little known is that the Japanese did not stop with raw materials. The plunder of each country they occupied was absolute, total. All banks, treasuries, and other depositories of wealth were looted. Even the bodies of the enemy dead were violated. Gold teeth were ripped out, fingers with rings cut off, museums, temples, churches were not spared, along with the temples of vice, gambling, prostitution, smuggling, opium, money lending. A group of Japanese officers, assisted by Special Engineer Brigade, began burying treasure. They took months of excavation to build elaborate tunnel systems and complexes large enough to hold trucks and sometimes deep enough to be below the water table. Remember that the Japanese built the first underwater tunnel from Kyushu further south of the four major islands to Honshu, the largest island in 1942. They had the technology, no doubt about it. Marcos believed in the treasure. After he became president, a large number of military personnel were assigned full-time to treasure hunt under the secret leadership of his most trusted Fabian Ver. Progress reports to Marcos about various treasure site excavations were found in the palace after the EDSA insurrection. Aside from Ver, the team included Colonel Mario Lachica, General Santiago Barangan, General Onofre Ramos, Colonel Florentino Villacrucis, Colonel Porfirio Hemoto, General Ramon Canu, General Tomas Dumpit, Colonel Orlando Dulay, Major Patricio Dumlao, Johnny Wilson, and Venancio Duque. There was treasure. Roger Rojas and his team of treasure hunters discovered a gold statuette of Buddha, almost 3 feet tall and too heavy to lift. On this day, they borrowed a truck and brought the Buddha back to Roger's house at 47 Ledesma Street in Baguio. It was 2 in the morning. When they finally got to weigh the statue, they saw that it weighed 2,000 pounds. The representative from the Treasure Hunters Association in Manila, Louis Mendoza, tested the Buddha and said it was 22 karat, about 92% pure gold. Another treasure hunter, First Lieutenant Ken Cheatham of the U.S. Air Force at Clark, came with his friends to see the Buddha and took a lot of photos. At 2:30 in the morning of today, Holy Monday, Marcos's uncle, Judge Pio Marcos, authorized the search of Roger Rojas' house because Roger had allegedly violated the central bank regulation. The search became messy and violent. At the end of the day, the Buddha was gone. Roger was picked up, blindfolded, and driven to a secret location outside Manila. He thought it was a military camp in Pampanga. They tortured him until he signed a confession stating that Marcos was not involved in the theft of the Buddha. The bombing opposition rally at Plaza Miranda, Roger Rojas was to be the main opposition exhibit in the anti-Marcos campaign to dramatize the gold greed and tyrannical methods of the president. The suspension of the writ of habeas corpus followed a month later, one of the elements forming the year-long prelude to martial law. While Marcos was rather quick later in life to talk about his wealth as the result of treasure hunting, he was all the time loath to talk about commissions and payoffs, confiscations, and outright thievery. In the year 1967, his first payoffs from the U.S. government, he committed troops to Vietnam. He began receiving quarterly checks of $200,000 each quarter, delivered by the U.S. Embassy, as per a secret agreement between officials of the Department of State and President Marcos, that the Philippine government could conceal the receipt of these payments from the Philippine public in its national defense budget. Papers found in Malacanang showed Marcos opened his first bank account abroad on this day, July 7, 1967, when he deposited $215,000 in Chase Manhattan Bank in New York. Not yet accustomed to hiding money, he used his own name. Following year, 1968, he opened his first Swiss account. Walter Fessler, an official of Credit Suisse Bank in Zurich, came to Manila. He was brought to Malacanang. Forms were filled out, signatures appended. On his signature verification form, Marcos wrote out William Saunders, pseudonym, an alias he had used in World War II days, and underneath that name he wrote Ferdinand Marcos, real name. Imelda did the same, choosing Jane Ryan as her pseudonym. 4 bank accounts were opened. 4 checks totaling $950,000 were given for the deposit. January 1, Marcos announced to the nation that he was giving up all his worldly wealth. He now admitted he was rich. This was amazing. He never admitted anything. But then came the blockbuster. You know how I made my pipe? I discovered Yamashita's treasure. The shabby excuse was universally judged exasperatingly unoriginal, but there it was. He said he was rich because of Yamashita's treasure, and he was giving all that up for the Filipino nation in gratitude for their electing him to a second term, for making him the only president ever to be re-elected, he proclaimed. Manila did not believe the Marcos Foundation announcement. The demonstrations got worse. protests turned violent. While the battle raged, Marcos and Imelda issued handwritten instructions to Marcos Gil on this day to establish another kind of foundation, one to be kept secret from the Filipino people. The Sunday Foundation in Vaduz, the capital city of Liechtenstein. This tiny state between Austria and Switzerland was famous for offering a unique form of corporate structure, the Anstalt, a single shareholder company protected by the world's tightest corporate secrecy laws. The CIA and KGB hid their covert funds there. Even Swiss bankers, who sometimes had the need to hide money, used the Anstalten. So careful, foundation had a different meaning in that part of the world. The Saunders and Ryan accounts were closed and the money transferred to the Sandy Foundation account at Credit Suisse. This will be the first of many foundations set up in this manner with Swiss bankers and lawyers as directors to hide the identities of Marcos and Imelda. 73, the central bank's gold reserves dropped to 1,057,000 ounces. Governor, I have to admit, Ruben Carranza, coming in now. Thank you, Ruben. Governor Licaros claimed that 800,000 ounces were sold to obtain much needed dollars, which would have brought in $28 million at the low official price of $35 an ounce. The Philippine Central Bank was a powerful entity in the Philippines. It was equivalent to the board of governors of the Federal Reserve in the US, plus most of the functions of the Federal Depositors Insurance Corporation and various state banking commissions. As governor, Licaros had complete discretion in the purchase and sale of gold. He answered to no one except to the president. A confidential source said that the gold mentioned here was sold not at official but at market value, which was at least double the official price or higher. Under the Marcos regime, a mafia-like code of silence was strictly observed to hide illicit transactions involving people's money. In the rare occasion when the public got to know some of the illegal dealings, no problem, the technocrats, men of integrity and brilliance, quote unquote, would employ a technique they had developed into a high art, namely the cover-up. They would justify cover-up on the ground the transactions were confidential. Graft and corruption operations are always confidential, of course. This bank, Marcoses, bought their first property in the US, condo in the exclusive Olympic Towers on 5th Avenue. 5 months later, they would also buy 3 adjoining apartments, paying a total of $4 million for the 4 and using Florendo's company, Thea Ventures Limited in Hong Kong, as front for these purchases. On New Year's Eve, Licaros had a problem. Foreign creditors wanted enough international reserves to cover 3 or 4 months of import requirements, but there was only enough to cover 2 months. So today, New Year's Day, Licaros had a solution taken straight from the book Alice in Wonderland. The solution was to give a new definition for the term international reserves. The term originally meant, quote, all gold, foreign exchange assets of the central bank, and net foreign exchange holdings of the commercial banks. The new definition excluded the net foreign exchange holdings of the commercial banks because it had become an increasingly larger negative figure. Why? Because they were borrowing more and more dollars. Plus, the new definition now included the central bank's borrowing as part of its foreign exchange assets. Thus, with the stroke of a pen, the value of the reserves almost doubled from $844.7 million to $1.525 billion, which was about 4.7 months of import requirements. August, Marcos' friend Eloy Bala was head of the Philippine Operations Mission in Japan, collected the kickbacks there in yen, then used his diplomatic status to take the yen out of Japan, go to Hong Kong, change it to US dollars at Berlin and Company, the foreign exchange dealer. After Balao died in August 1977, Andres Henito Jr. set up the Anjanit Investment Corporation, to receive the kickbacks and opened an account at Wing Lung Bank in Hong Kong. Berlin and company transferred $44,030,378 from its account in Hang Lung Bank to Wing Lung Bank. Today, after addressing the UN General Assembly, may ba naman, Imelda celebrated by going shopping and spending $384,000, including $50,000 for a platinum bracelet with rubies, $50,000 for a diamond bracelet, and $58,000 for a pin set with diamonds. The day before, by the way, anybody who doubted this, I had the original notebook of Fe Jimenez at Vilma Bautista. Now I guess in public, which I turn over to the PCGG. The day before, Vilma Bautista, one of her private secretaries, paid $18,500 for a gold pendant with diamonds and emeralds, $9,450 for a gold ring with diamonds and emeralds, and $4,800 for a gold and diamond necklace. Marcoses, in October, donated $1.5 million to Tufts University in Boston, endowing a professional chair in East Asian and Pacific Studies at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. The students and professors discovered this and forced the school to reject the donation. To save face, the Marcoses were allowed to finance several seminars and lectures. Still at their shopping spree, Imelda paid $450,000 for a gold necklace and bracelet with emeralds, rubies, and diamonds, $300,000 for a gold ring with emeralds and diamonds, and $300,000 for a gold pendant with diamonds, rubies, and 39 emeralds. April 17, Marcos signed PD 602, ordering all gold producers to sell to the central bank only. In September, he inaugurated the new central bank gold refinery and mint in Quezon City, East Avenue. 78, in Vaduz during this month, the names kept changing. The ASU Foundation, I've already explained what the foundation meant, was renamed Verso, Scolari was renamed Balaamu, and Sandy was renamed Winthrop, November 11, 78. Baltasar Aquino collected the kickbacks of public highways, funds ranging from 10 to 15%. On this day, $407,322.07 was credited to his account by Berlin and Company, February 1979. May 79, the Marcos couple celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in a party that cost $5 billion. There was a silver carriage drawn by 8 white horses. 2 representatives of Standard Chartered Hong Kong Trustee Limited, Palvine and Lai Wai Hong, visited Malacanang Palace. A trust agreement was drawn up. Vine returned to Manila on December 5, 1980, and met with Rolando Gapud, Marcos's chief financial advisor, and Gapud's erstwhile boss, Jose Y. Campos, one of Marcos's close friends. 2 trust accounts, a dollar account and a peso account, were opened at Security Bank and Trust Company. Campos was signatory for Marcos. These 2 accounts were owned by the trust in Hong Kong, which was owned and controlled by Marcos and Imelda. Afterward, 10 other trust accounts were opened at SBTC, 7700, 7710, 7720, etc. And a deed of trust was executed between Standard Chartered and Security Bank for each account. For example, the deed of trust for account 7730 was between Beneficio Investment Inc., the Panamanian Corporation, and SBTC. That account owned Beneficio Investment, whose bearer shares were held by Standard Chartered for Marcos and Imelda. So aside from the Hong Kong accounts, the accounts were opened in Switzerland, in Credit Suisse, in Bank Paribas, Lombard Odier et Compagnie, Swiss Bank Corporation, Swiss Volksbank Finanz AG, Trade Development Bank, and Bank Hofmann. Accounts were opened at Barclays in London, also offshore banks in Cayman Islands and New Hebrides. In the US, they had 83 accounts in 9 banks, including Lloyds Bank and California Overseas Bank in Los Angeles, Redwood Bank in San Francisco, Irving Trust, Citibank, Chase Manhattan, Chemical Bank, and Manufacturers Hanover in New York. The money just kept pouring in. Lucio Tan paid Marcos 100 million pesos a year, According to Gapud, Tan belongs to the group that could get presidential decrees and letters of instruction from Marcos for their joint benefit. Marcos demanded 60% of the shares of Lucio Tan's holding company, Shareholdings Inc., which owned Fortune Tobacco, Asia Brewery, Allied Bank, and Foremost Farms. What applied to Tan was also true of the other cronies like Silverio, Delta Motors. About 10 million pesos in cash were deposited weekly in the SBTC accounts and then wire transferred to accounts in Hong Kong and from there to Swiss bank accounts controlled by the foundations. As chief financial advisor, Gapud acquired hundreds of millions of dollars of shares in a multitude of companies, shares endorsed in blank by the original owner, making them bearer certificates and allowing Marcos to avoid direct involvement, but assuring him secret controlling interest in almost every industry in the nation: banking, insurance, mining, shipping, oil, sugar, coconut, manufacturing, construction, etc. Well, November 23rd, the house was purchased at 4 Capshire Drive in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, actually near to Philadelphia, where Bongbong was taking courses at that time for use by servants in Bongbong's security detachment. The Marcoses did not neglect their annual real estate purchase. During this year, next year, 79, they purchased 2 properties, one at 3850 Princeton Pike, Princeton, 13-acre estate for use by daughter Amy as she attended Princeton. The other was a house at 19 Pennington Drive in Cherry Hill for use of Bongbong and under the name of Tristan Deplat, erstwhile head of the American Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines, I think president of Caltex. When I discovered these properties, I almost ran out, Cecile. I remember calling Sunny. I was running out of quarters because I had to use quarters all the time to Xerox copy the titles from the local offices when we were doing the research. In 2 days in New York this month, April 79, Imelda spent $280,000 for a necklace with emeralds and diamonds, etc., etc. More of the same type of gastusan. And 1980 gold reserves were on a steady annual rise. We are one of the top 3 or 5 gold producers on the planet. You have to never forget. From 1978 to date, gradually increasing to 1,900,000 ounces, or an average of 8 metric tons a year, which was about the equivalent of local production. The price of gold reached an all-time high of $875 an ounce this month. Despite this, 4 chambers of commerce, the European, American, Japanese, and Australian, submitted a position paper under the guise of finding ways to attract new foreign investment. Red tape, corruption, flawed infrastructure were delicately criticized. The message: it had not been easy doing business in the Philippines. This was decidedly a different tune from the one they sang to Marcos when the latter first abolished democracy in the land. Things looked rosy then, but gradually the foreign business community realized even they were not playing on a level field. 1980, Marcos attended the American Newspaper Publishers Association, ANPA convention. Movement for a Free Philippines, and Manglabos and Alvarez had a field day, exposing the true Philippine situation. Under such pressure, the White House deliberately snubbed Marcos. In 1980, for $1,577,000 in New York, Imelda buys Webster Hotel on West 45th Street. She rewards General Romeo Gatan as a limited partner. Gatan was the guy who arrested Ninoy at the beginning of martial law. After the International Reserve scandal died down, Marcos issued PD 1937, eliminating the 10-year limit on the amortization of losses at the central bank. Before this decree, the CB had to write off 1/10 of its losses every year. Now they could be amortized, quote, over a period at a rate which shall be based on the adequacy of the central bank's profits. In other words, forever. When Marcos signed this decree, the CB losses were fast approaching 100 billion pesos, or more than 4 times the amount known to be missing from the international reserves. Now, 1/10 of these losses would no longer have to be written off annually. Incredibly, they were listed as assets. Section 43D of this PD read, the Monetary Board may, whenever it deems it advisable, exclude from the computation of the annual profits and losses of any given fiscal year all or part of the extraordinary expenses incurred during the year. Unquote. Only the CB knew what it considered extraordinary and could be excluded from public view and scrutiny. Could this be the expenditures incurred by Marcos and Imelda for the May 14th and 24 Batasan elections? Could this be the source funds for the hidden wealth stashed abroad? Indeed, the question must be asked. What items of expenditures have been eliminated from the CB 1984 and 1985 profit and loss statements that utilized this particular seemingly innocuous section? January 10, Jobo Fernandez, head of First Bank, is summoned by Marcos to the palace and given Laya's old job, governor of the central bank. The IMF said the central bank had overstated its reserves by $264 million in 1981, $823 million in 82, $1.2 billion in 83. Gross reserves had fallen $1.4 billion between June and December 83. This means the CB now had no usable reserves. It could no longer pay its foreign debt. Bobby Ongpin reported an estimated $2 billion had flown the country in 84 and $1 billion the year before. What was the role of the IMF resident representative who since 1970 had been keeping regular office hours in the CB? The CB paid for the residential mansion of the IMF resident rep and furnished him with a car and uniformed driver. Was the IMF resident rep who was regularly furnished papers and reports of personnel of departments and offices wittingly or unwittingly a party or accessory to the falsification of international reserves? 295 world media, in particular, San Jose Mercury News, Far Eastern Economic Review, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Nation, aided by the opposition in exile, intensified the expose of the hidden billions and the draining of the Philippines. So while Marcos battled the hidden wealth scandal, a gold deal was being offered in Israel. Oliver North was trying to find ways to fund the contrast of Nicaragua. The Israelis had 40 metric tons of gold for sale for $465 million, with a possible 20 more tons if the first deal went through. The commission would net $5 million for the contrast. Fabian Ver knew the Israelis had befriended them and they used him to sign fake end-user certificates for arms shipments destined for Iran. When the buyers found out the seller was Ver, they approached him directly to cut out the Israeli middleman. To verify, an Interpol cable stated that 3 suspicious shipments, 1 of gold and 2 of silver, had been made by the central bank. Speculation was that the Marcos family was diverting the precious metals to Switzerland to put them in their personal accounts. A bill of lading from 1 shipment showed that 244 silver bars weighing 8,202 kilograms were received by the First United Transport in October 11, 85, and moved to the docks escorted by the Presidential Security Command there. So the illegal use of aid funds as being the norm and not the exception is exemplified by the following. The central bank wired the Federal Reserve Bank in New York to pay $50 million to First Chicago International for account of Lombard for redemption of US dollar treasury notes. The Fed wired back on December 20 that there was only $6 million in the account. 6. Then $45 million earmarked for USAID projects in the Philippines was released by the US, part of which was used to redeem the notes. That's the 85. By year end, Imelda's Metro Manila Commission had managed to accumulate debts of 1.99 billion pesos, which included $100 million in foreign loans in its 10 years of existence. Imelda had accomplished nothing and left the people embittered and even more disillusioned. The insurgents' ranks grew by 20% a year. Meritorious officers in the armed forces experienced low morale due to Marcos's penchant for promoting friends over more deserving officers. Senator Edward Kennedy, citing numerous reports of corruption at the highest levels of the Philippine government, asked the U.S. General Accounting Office to investigate economic and military assistance programs to the country. Report, $92.5 million of non-project ESF aid could not be accounted for, and the team could not state that $227 million in ESF funds were not misused. For instance, the National Electrification Administration padded a $1.45 million disaster relief fund for the rehabilitation of typhoon-wrecked power lines. They had submitted false vouchers amounting to $108,441. During this time, just before the EDSA uprising, there were 20 wire transfers totaling $94 million to 3 Swiss banks. Bank Hofmann, Société de Banque Suisse, Union de Banque Suisse, one Swiss company, Transammonia AG, 5 foreign banks in Zurich and Geneva, and the Commerzbank in Luxembourg. Where did these monies come from? From the gold accounts abroad? The central bank has refused to answer this question. In fact, all central bank bosses have attempted to bury the central bank bosses along with the past by restructuring the old debt. How much was actually stolen and written off under the special accounts? And how much gold, if any, did Marcos steal from the international reserves? Is there any doubt that he looted the central bank? Well then, where is the final tally of the loot? During this time, just before the, wait a minute, when Jobo bills were issued, they were meant to complement the operations of the Binondo Central Bank that had been organized by Marcos and Ong Pin to secure dollar to shore up official reserves. Ong Pin assured the big dollar traders that they would find attractive use for the Philippine pesos despite the deteriorating conditions of the country because the Jobo bills were simply too attractive with incredibly high interest rates. Absent money laundering legislation, it was not difficult for hot cash from all over to enter the Philippine financial system. Jobo's Far East Bank, Philam Life, and AIG meanwhile made a killing, brokering the initial placement interfaces of these hot monies into the Philippine financial system. The short-term nature of the Jobo bills made an ideal cover for the layering phase of the money laundering process. Heavy soaping, that is maturation of bills, reinvestment and transformation into other financial instruments like dollars, TEVEX services provided by Far East Bank was gladly facilitated. And all of this was done at someone's expense, at the expense of Juan de la Cruz, who must now bear on his shoulder the heavy cross or intertemporal burden of future taxes as the huge bankruptcy losses of the old CB is amortized into the economy flows. We're almost there. Marcos fled the Philippines, leaving behind a foreign debt of $27 million. And the bureaucracy gone mad. Cash advances for the elections from the National Treasury amounted to 3.12 billion pesos, $150 million. The central bank printed millions of peso bills, many with the same serial number. Same. 60 million pesos in newly printed bills were found in a vehicle owned by Imelda's brother Bejo in the port area of Manila. And another 100 million pesos aboard the MV Legazpi, also owned by Bejo Romualdez. How massive and humongous a loot Marcos took can be deduced from the known losses he left behind. The known losses he left the central bank included $1.2 billion in missing reserves and $6 billion in special accounts. Imelda charged of most of her spending sprees to the PNB or Philippine National Bank, which creatively wrote off her debts as unresponded transfers. Remember, Jun Yasay and I used to just observe how Oscar was the name of the PNB guy, would get nervous every time Imelda would be announced to be coming to town. There also used PNB funds to finance his intelligence operations against the MFP, against the NAM, against all the activists in exile. The known losses of the PNB amounted to 72.1 billion pesos. At the DBP, the losses Marcos left behind totaled 85 billion pesos. At the field guarantee, it was 6.2 billion pesos. And at the NIDC, or the National Investment and Development Corporation, the losses amounted to 2.8 billion pesos. These losses were primarily due to cronyism, giving loans to cronies that had little or no collateral, whose corporations were undercapitalized, whose loan proceeds were not used for the avowed purpose, and where the practice of corporate layering was common, that is, using two or more companies with the same incorporators and officers, whereby one company which gives the loan owns the company which obtains the loan, or similar arrangements. The cronies enjoyed closeness to Marcos. With him, they formed a grand coalition. They participated in the exercise of dictatorship, but Marcos owned them. The wealth of the cronies belonged to him. Because of the free, he talked. Because of the free rides taken by Imelda, Marcos, and the cronies, the Philippine Airlines was in debt by $13.8 billion. The conservative grand total for losses Marcos left behind, and therefore the kind of loot he grabbed and hid, amounted to $17.1 billion. The central bank, the PNB, and other financial institutions badly need an audit. The special review, not regular audit. Special review, not regular audit, because there seems not to have been any. There are no records anyway. Did not uncover Imelda's spending. Her name never appeared. Unveiled intelligence fund. The review gave no hint of theft or missing money, only downward adjustments and proposed adjustments to deficiencies and shortages of money. Few hours after the Marcos party landed in Honolulu, their luggage arrived. 300 crates on board the C-141 cargo jet. It took 25 customs officers 5 hours to tag the bags and identify the contents. The process was videotaped because of all the money and jewelry found inside. There were 278 crates of jewelry and art worth an estimated $5 million. 22 crates contained more than 27.7 million pesos in newly minted currency, mostly 100 peso denominations worth approximately $1.2 million. Remember, it was illegal for anyone to depart the Philippines carrying more than 500 pesos in cash. There were other certificates of deposit from Philippine banks worth about $1 million, 5 handguns, 154 videotapes, 17 cassette tapes, 2,068 pages of documents, all of which were impounded by U.S. Customs. Marcos' party was allowed to keep only $300,000 in gold and $150,000 in bearer bonds that they brought in with their personal luggage because they declared them and broke no U.S. Customs laws, supposedly. There were 24 1-kilo gold bars fitted into $17,000 hand-tooled Gucci briefcase with a solid gold buckle and a plaque on it that read, "To Ferdinand Marcos from Imelda on the occasion of our 24th wedding anniversary." When Marcos departed the Philippines, surpassed the losses in the central bank account, surpassed 122 billion pesos, or the $6 billion. The big bulk of losses was attributed to the RIR account mainly due to two items: forward cover and swap contracts. Forward cover referred to foreign exchange provided by the CB at a fixed exchange rate to importers of essential commodities. Swap contracts referred to CBs receiving foreign exchange from banks in exchange for pesos at the prevailing rate, with a promise to deliver the foreign exchange back to them at an agreed future date. No mention of losses due to CB transactions in gold or foreign exchange. Jim Burke, security expert from the U.S. Embassy, was tapping on the wooden paneling in Imelda's abandoned Malacanang bedroom. This is after EDSA. When he heard a hollow sound, it was the walk-in vault. Inside were 35 suitcases secured with locks and tape. They contained a treasure trove of documents about Swiss bank accounts, New York real estate, foundations in Vaduz, the foundation that I explained, different kind, and some note paper in which Marcos had practiced his William Saunders signature. They also contained jewelry valued at some $10.5 million. Jokingly referring to himself as the Office of National Events, the vigilante team, led by myself and Linggoy Alcuas, received a tip in the morning that Marcos' daughter, in March 1986, had kept a private office in the suburb of Mandaluyong at 82 EDSA. We obtained a search warrant for us to come to pick up some soldiers. For devising a plan, we boarded our 4 cars and drove to the premises, arriving around midnight. Soldiers scaled the fence and sealed off the area. We went in and found documents in cardboard boxes, desks, and filing cabinets. Fire could be heard outside, our people and theirs, but it didn't deter us. The documents revealed the names of offshore companies and overseas investments of Marcos and his cronies. A late link in the paper trail that had been started abroad by the teams of Avila, Sinakis, Alvarez, Daza, Gallego, and Raul Manglapos. So did Marcos steal any gold from the CB? The CB always refused to comment. Why? Today, March 16, 1986, the LA Times reported that 6.325 metric tons of gold was unaccounted for in the CB. Between 78, the year Marcos ordered all gold producers to sell only to the CB, and end 1984, the Bureau of Mines reported that 124,234 pounds of gold were refined. But the CB reported receiving only 110,319 pounds during the same period. That left a difference of 13,915 pounds, 6.325 metric tons of gold. March 1986, banker Michael de Guzman flew into Honolulu. Talked to Erwin Ver, who brought him to Marcos, Imelda, and Bongbong. Calls were made to Zurich, to Ernst Scheller of Credit Suisse. Marcos prepared 2 letters of authority. Mike was their last hope to withdraw the monies from the Swiss banks. Marcos had tried 2 on March 21, but was prevented because of the freeze order of the Swiss authorities. So on March 24th, Mike de Guzman tried his luck. No luck. He tried it again May 7th. Still the banks refused because of the freeze order. So Mike knew it was time to go back home to the new Philippine government. He offered to help them get the Marcos deposits in return for a fee. Supporting Mike was Ibrahim Daguerre, a Lebanese businessman. They had identified one account for $213 million and 11 foundations that held a total of $4.5 billion in deposits in 9 different banks, with an additional $3 billion in precious metals and securities on deposit, or a tentative total of $7.5 billion. Operation Big Word had commenced. I was part of that, Mike and Joe Almonte. Operation Big Word. The first attempt to recover the Marcos loot was organized by Salonga, Said Frey, myself, and General Jose Almonte. We worked with the European banking systems and Swiss government to recover the money hidden at Swiss banks. The strategy in the mind of Almonte was to use Filipino bankers in Europe to double-cross the Marcoses in having the latter issue a special power of attorney, SPA, to move his money from possible investigation by Philippine and European governments. While $7.5 billion of accounts were identified, this mission only succeeded in transferring $356 million from Marcos connected accounts to the Philippine government accounts. PCGG, this organization, enabled Marcos to sense the double cross and withdraw the SPA. The Swiss Attorney General readily ordered the freezing of the rest of the accounts until the Philippine government could prove that these accounts belong to the Filipino people. The recovered money ballooned to $570 million by 1998 when it was transferred from Switzerland to the Philippine National Bank escrow account. By 2003, the Philippine Supreme Court, GR 1531-54, released a decision with finality that the said money was considered public fund, like all other monies and assets beyond the declared income of Ferdinand and Imelda, which amounted to only a few $1,000s. June 5, a U.S. judge ordered customs to release Marcos money, jewelry, and belongings. Then a timely government appeal prevented the implementation of the order. The Marcoses were being charged by the Attorney General in New York of violations of the RICO, Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization Statute. The Philippine government followed suit by filing several civil cases in the U.S. Subpoenas began to arrive. Very decided to leave, flying out of the country on a fake passport. And quietly, Marcos put out the word, find another safe haven. He wasn't welcome anywhere, unfortunately. There was nowhere to go. He became a target for conmen who made a lot of promises and asked for a lot of money. Marcos admitted to lawyers that 4 Philippine government agencies, NISA, National Intelligence Security Authority, Intelligence Section of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and the National Bureau of Investigation, targeted oppositionists in exile and other anti-Marcos organizations for intelligence and counterintelligence operations from military attachés in the Philippine Embassy and their consulates. And you know what counterintelligence can also mean? It can mean extrajudicial killings. Also, using the Freedom of Information Act, lawyers obtained 400 pages of documents from U.S. intelligence agencies related to U.S.-Philippine intelligence dealings. This showed the CIA, FBI, and U.S. government officials had knowledge of various intelligence activities in the U.S. and extended him full cooperation. The global freeze in the Marcos loot was not totally effective. By Humanis Marcos' 2 trust accounts, Standard Chartered Hong Kong Trustee Limited, received instructions from Marcos and remitted $708,000 to the law firm of Anderson, Hybe, Mannheim, and Blair, Marcos attorneys in Washington, D.C. How much more Marcos was able to move after the freeze may never be known. An NBI informant posing as a buyer saw 90-75 kilogram gold bars in an apartment building in Quezon City, owned by an aide of Bongbong Marcos. That's about 6.76 metric tons, or almost the same amount of gold missing and written of in the LA Times March 16th issue. And here's a longer list of questions. In 73, reserves dropped from 1,857,000 ounces, 52.75 metric tons, to 1,057,000 ounces. The CB claimed 800,000 ounces were sold. Assuming an annual production of 30 metric tons, what about the gold produced that year? From 74 to 77, gold reserves stayed at exactly the same figure of 1,056,000 ounces. Again, what about the 4 years of production totaling approximately 120 metric tons? Gold reserves began another steady annual rise in 78. From then until 1980, they gradually increased to 1,900,000 ounces, for an average of about 8 metric tons a year. What about the other 22 metric tons annually, totaling 66 tons? 81, reserves took a dip to 1,650,000 ounces, a drop of 7.1 metric tons, which was sold. But another 30 metric tons should have been produced. Reserves rose by 6.1 metric tons in 1982 to 1,866,000 ounces. That left 23.9 metric tons unaccounted for. It has really dropped to 289,000 ounces, a decrease of 44.8 metric tons from the year before, which was sold. What about the 30 metric tons produced? In 1984, they rose to 786,000 ounces, an increase of 14.1 metric tons. That left 15.9 metric tons unaccounted for. In 1985, they rose to 1,478,000 ounces, an increase of 19.7 metric tons. That left 10.3 metric tons unaccounted for. Okay, Marcos departed in February 86. Is it true that Marcos propagated? Here we go. My dear friend, historian, is it true that Marcos propagated the Yamashita myth to hide the fact that he looted the central bank, that its gold
Right.
bars were melted down and recast in odd-sized bars to make them look old. How does gold look old anyway? Marcos claimed that he received the surrender of General Yamashita, don't laugh, after a battle with his guerrilla outfit. History has recorded that Yamashita surrendered to Lieutenant Obra Smith Kenworthy and that there was no battle. Yamashita's peaceful surrender had been arranged at least 2 weeks before the event. In one entry in Marcos' diary, he noted, "I often wonder what I will be remembered for in history." This is what they want to revise now. Scholar, military hero. In his supreme irony, he did achieve what he so vainly sought, lasting fame, but not in the way he envisioned. The fame of being the largest human rights case in history, 10,000 victims, the Guinness Book of Records, the world's greatest thief, the largest monetary award in history, $22 billion. September 13, 1986, questioned by Philippine and US lawyers about his hidden wealth, Marcos took the fifth, 197 times. Imelda followed suit 200 times.
The fifth, yung meaning he was saying na I refuse to implicate myself, no?
Yes.
200 times. So Charlie, yeah. That was a very compelling summary, no? Actually, marami pa yun,
Short,
na hindi
short
niya
version. That was the short
binasa
version.
lahat. That's the short version. And I would like to refer you, please Google Charles Avila, Marcos chronology. No?
Yeah.
Yan, tama. Is that right? Yeah, Marcos chronology report. And doon nyo po mababasa yung buong
Yes.
report. Tita?
Napakalinaw ang paglalahad ni Charlie tungkol sa research na ginawa talaga para mahabol, makita, mapatunayan na meron talagang nakaw na yaman, merong mga illegal na ginawa. Mahaba pa po ang pagsasalaysay mamaya ni Charlie. Ngunit ngayon, nagagalak po tayo bukod kay ating history professor na si Xiao, kasama po natin ang dating PCGG Commissioner, si Ruben Carranza. Sapagkat napakahalaga po ang kanyang pananaw o ang testimonya niya na totoo, mapapatunayan dahil napakaraming kababalaghan na kwento na sinasabing walang ninakaw na pera, walang nangyaring tinatawag na conviction. So ang PCGG rin dyan ang maaring magkwento. So bago po ipagpatuloy ni Charlie pa ang talagang pagpapatunay kung anong mga kalokohan ang ginawa na panloloko para makamkam itong pera at nagamit sa luxury, sa kalokohan at iba pa. Buksan po natin ang higit pang paglilinaw mula sa ating komentarista.
So, maikli ang lang po, summary nung binanggit ni Sir Charlie kanina. Basically, sinasabi natin na hindi ho milyon-milyon ang kayamanan ng mga Marcos dahil ito po, nung sila yung maging Pangulo, dahil meron pong mga ITR o income tax returns na nagpapakita na daang libo lamang ang yearly income ng mga Marcoses at libo-libo lamang yung kanilang mga assets. At nagsimula ho ito dahil may mga ibinibigay ang Estados Unidos din na pera, na supposedly aid, at may mga at nakakapagtaka na nakapagdeposito na po sa iba't ibang bangko sa buong mundo ang mga Marcoses, at gumagamit po sila ng mga fictitious names tulad ng William Saunders at Jane Ryan as early as 1968, hindi po before 1965. Yan po ang malinaw po, nung nagsimulang magpresidente, doon lamang po nagkaroon ng mga bank accounts na ito na nagpalit-palit po ang mga pangalan through the years. No, gayon din po makikita natin na nagkakaroon ng pagsaipon o paglalabas ng pera, no, mula sa PNB, mula sa central bank tungo sa iba't ibang bangko sa mundo na ngayon na eventually po ay ginagamit po sa mga shopping sprees, sa pagbili ng mga properties sa iba-iba pong lugar sa sa Estados Unidos halimbawa. Yan po ang basically na makikita natin dito at liban pa ho dyan sa na-acquire nila ay sa shopping sprees ay mga milyong dolyar na halaga. One example is a $3.5 million painting from Michelangelo, no? At mga iba't ibang mga alahas, no, na nabibili nila. May isa pong panahon na si Ginang Imelda Marcos po ay bumili sa sa isang jewelry store, no, ng Bulgari ng $1.4 million sa isang araw nang iilang piraso lamang po ng jewelry. So yan po eventually nung tinangkapong dalhin ng mga Marcos ang ilan sa mga nailabas na ho nila yung marami sa mga kayamanan na ito po ipinahagi din sa mga cronies, no? Ibig sabihin pinahawak sa kanilang mga pangalan ang mga kumpanya na ito, bagamat kay Marcos pa rin ang mga ito, ay tinangkang ilabas nung nagkakumahog na po sila nung EDSA Revolution. Subalit ito po ay naharang ng US Customs ang ilan sa mga jewelries, na mga mahalagang bagay, ginto at pera. So yun po ang iniwan o naiwan ng mga Marcoses na kumbaga pandarambong. Subalit, eventually, paano ba ma-uncover lahat ng ito? Liban pa sa mga work ng mga katulad ni Charlie Avila, nariyan po ang naging papel ng Presidential Commission on Good Governance. No? So Sir Ruben, okay lang po ba, ma'am? Tanungin mo na si Sir
kailangan
Ruben.
tanungin natin kasi we're very lucky na we have a PCGG Commissioner para mailahad kung ano ba talaga ang pagpapatunay na talagang merong nakaw na yaman na naibalik natin at kailangan marami pang hahanapin o maibabalik. Paano ngayon yung prosesong yon? Ano sa palagay mo ang pag-asa na makuha pa itong mga ito at paano ang pagpapatibay talaga na stolen money? Kasi binobola ang taong bayan at naniniwala naman, lalo na yung mga walang karanasan o hindi alam itong lalim ng galing nila ng pagtatago o pagkamkam ng pera.
Siguro, first things first, Sir Ruben, ano po yung PCGG? At baka makalimutan na ng mga tao dahil parang pawala na po, no? Pero ano po yung PCGG? At paano po ninyo ginawa yung work ng pagkuha ng mga ebidensya at pagpapail ng mga kaso sa iba't ibang lugar sa mundo?
Narinig ko na si Ferdinand Marcos Jr. nung isang linggo tinanong kung anong gagawin niya sa PCGG kung sakaling siya maging presidente. Sabi niya, I will strengthen the PCGG. Papalakasin daw niya ang PCGG. Number one, halatang hindi binasa ni Marcos Jr. yung batas na gumawa sa PCGG. At saka number two, isang paraan lang naman na pwede mapalakas kung si Marcos Jr. nga ang magiging presidente. Isang paraan lang pwede palakasin ng PCGG. Pwede niyang palakasin ng PCGG by actually just surrendering the assets that his family stole, because he's the one in control of those assets. He and his mother, they're co-administrators of the estate of Ferdinand Marcos. In other words, sila yung may hawak na susi dun sa iniwan na nakaw na yaman nung namatay si Ferdinand Marcos Sr. Hindi niya binasa yung batas na gumawa ng PCGG dahil ang Executive Order number 1, pinirmahan ni dating Presidente Corazon Aquino, ilang araw lang mula nung napatalsik ang mga Marcos, malinaw na sinasabi na ang mandato ng PCGG ay ang paghanap at pagbabalik sa Pilipinas ng mga nakaw na yaman. Walang ibang English translation na mas malinaw kundi ill-gotten wealth. Nakaw na yaman ng mga Marcos. Tinutukoy sila by name. Hindi sinasabing mga nakaw na yaman ng lahat ng mga naging presidente ng Pilipinas o mga nakaw na yaman ng mga lahat ng mga oligarch na kahit si Pangulong Duterte lagi sinasabing oligarch pero hindi lahat ng oligarch. Ito hindi lahat ng mga nagnakaw ng yaman, hindi lahat ng mga oligarch, hindi lahat ng mga naging crony ng mga pangulo, kundi Ferdinand Marcos, his family, his relatives, and cronies. So may enumeration.
Sir Ruben,
May
sorry,
nababasa din ako.
liwanagin ko lang. Kasi di ba may mga nagsasabi, hindi nagawa yan ni Pangulong Duterte kay Pangulong Gloria, na si Pangulong Gloria i-single out. No? Of course, kailangan liwanagin na, of course, in the 1987 Constitution, sinasabi na walang pwedeng diskriminasyon. Di ba? Parehas ang treatment. Pero, tandaan natin na nung inisyo ni Pangulong Cory yung Executive Order number 1 na ito, wala po tayong konstitusyon. Meron po tayong revolutionary government. Kaya nagawa niya itong batas na ito, singling out, isang government agency na nagsisingle out dahil nga 20 years yung Marcos dictatorship po. Continue, please continue, Sir Ruben.
At saka hindi lang naman yung pagiging revolutionary government, yung tamang batayan, no, na bakit pwedeng mag-issue ka ng batas kung ang pinabayaan mo yung batasang pambansa ni Marcos, ang gumawa ng batas para habulin si Marcos, hindi mangyayari yun noong 1987 or 1986 dahil ang batasang pambansa are the same people na nilista doon sa Executive Order number 1. So, marami rin sa kanila sumama doon sa eroplano na binanggit kanina ni Charlie na 90 people were on board the first C-130 and then the other C-130 consisted of all the cash and jewelry they could stash, carry personally outside of the Philippines. So, but the other reason na pwede mong gawin yung Executive Order number 1, ang pag-create ng PCGG ay dahil meron kang factual basis dun sa batas na gagawin mo. Kaya, and hindi lang naman sa Pilipinas ginagawa yan, no? You make a finding of fact in a law and then you pass the law. So, may mga batas na hindi na sinasabi kung ano yung batayan para gawin yung batas. Pero maraming batas na sinasabi muna ano yung batayan. Merong terorismo sa Pilipinas dahil sinalakay ng ISIS ang Marawi. So, gagawa ka ngayon ng batas. No? Yung batas na ginawa nila na anti-terrorism law exceeds what they need to do. But that's the point of making a law. No? You find the factual basis and then you create the legal policy. Hindi lang yun. No? Ang PCGG, ilang beses na question ang pagkabuo ng PCGG sa Korte Suprema ng Pilipinas. No? Pagkalabas pa lang ng Executive Order number 1 and then sumunod yung Executive Order number 2, no? Dinagdagan yung mandato, kinarify. Maraming mga alagad ni Marcos ang pumunta kaagad sa Supreme Court to question the PCGG's existence. In a series of Supreme Court decisions, which I studied in law school. I went to law school the year after the end of the Marcos dictatorship. I had to study these cases. They were live cases. No? Ibig sabihin, kakasampa lang sa Supreme Court and then may decision a few months later. So binabasa namin yung mga decision na yun nung freshman law student ako. And the Supreme Court upheld the creation of the PCGG. The Supreme Court made it clear that it not only was legal, but it was necessary. So, the mandate of the PCGG is to recover the ill-gotten wealth of the Marcos family and their cronies. Ilang dekada na mayroong PCGG. Lagi kong nakikita na maraming sabi, nakatatlong taon na yung PCGG higit, bakit wala paling na-recover? Ito yung mga kasinungalingan na gustong patakbuhin ng mga Marcos. No? Hindi lang oversimplified, kundi simply false na walang na-recover. Kung walang na-recover, naalala ko ito at siguro hihinto ako pagkatapos ko ikwento ito. Nung bago pa lang ako sa PCGG, meron kaming budget hearing. Kasi kailangan, may pondo rin yung PCGG. Magkano lang yung pondo ng PCGG? I think 10 million pesos. It's so small. Pero may budget hearing pa rin. So pinapapunta kami sa Kongreso. Si Amy Marcos was a congresswoman from Ilocos at that time. Before we went to the budget hearing, the PCGG published an inventory of all the cases that we found were still pending in court. Sandigan Bayan, Supreme Court, all other courts. Ang chairperson namin noon, si Chairperson Heidi Yorak, who was my teacher in law school. At pinag-usapan namin yan, anong step ang gagawin namin. So, nag-inventory kami at hindi lang nag-inventory, hindi lang namin nilista ang mga kaso. Pinablish namin ito sa mga dyaryo sa Pilipinas. Nakita ito ni Amy Marcos. Bago yung budget hearing. Ang ginawa ni Amy Marcos, nagpatawag galing sa opisina niya, kasi ako yung in-interview about the inventory. Sabi niya, papuntahin nga yan si Commissioner Carranza dito sa opisina ko, sa Kongreso, bago mag-budget hearing. So ang sagot ko, meron din naman akong opisina sa PCGG, but hindi si Amy Marcos ang pumunta sa PCGG. Yung office ng PCGG, tinukoy yan ni Charlie kanina, ito yung 82 EDSA, Mandaluyong.
Right.
Ito yung merong secret passage sa kwarto ni Amy Marcos para makatakas. At yung office niya mismo, yung kwarto niya na ginamit, yun ang naging opisina ko sa PCGG.
Grabe. Ang tanong, Sir Ruben, bago tayo magpatuloy, my question is, so bakit po ito, isang question na lagi pong gusto ko itanong yung mga tanong na tinatanong ng mga tao O bakit daw po hindi nakulong si Ferdinand Marcos at bakit daw hindi po nakukulong ang mga Marcoses? Of course, alam natin very technical yan, pero sa madaling salita, bakit daw gano'n?
Si Ferdinand Marcos namatay bago siya makulong.
Correct.
Si Ferdinand Marcos ilang beses inimbestigahan ng US government. He was in exile. So he never got to come back to the Philippines. Hindi mo maaaring kasuhan yung tao na wala sa teritoryo ng Pilipinas. There's no trial in absentia in the Philippines. So pwede mong sampahan ng kaso, pero hindi mo pwedeng ituloy yung kaso. In one case alone, and I think Charlie mentions this, ilang beses mismo si Ferdinand Marcos Sr. Nag-invoke ng the right against self-incrimination. Ibig sabihin, karapatan na wag mong aminin, wag kang piliting umamin ng mga krimen na ginawa mo. So, isang kaso pa lang. Siguro buong period nung pagtitestigo, puro lang invocation of right against self-incrimination ang ginawa ni Marcos Sr. Patay na siya. Hindi na siya pwedeng kasuhan. Nung kinasuhan si Ferdinand Marcos Sr. at si Imelda Marcos sa New York ng racketeering case, ang naging abogado pa nga, naging prosecutor pa nga sa kasong yun si Rudolph Giuliani, naging mayor at naging sidekick ni Trump later on. Ang pinaghandaan nila sa kaso si Marcos Sr. Bakit si Marcos Sr.? Because siya yung diktador, siya yung presidente. Hindi naman si Imelda Marcos ang pumipirma ng mga presidential decree, kundi si Marcos Sr. Namatay si Marcos Sr. sa kalagitnaan or bago magsimula yung trial. At ang natirang defendant, si Imelda Marcos. Kung ang prosecutor mo ay isang Rudolph Giuliani na wala namang kaalam-alam tungkol sa pangyayari sa Pilipinas, at nandun lang, naging kaso lang yan dahil nandun sila sa Amerika, mahirap bumuelta, mahirap bawiin at maghanda ng kaso laban kay Imelda Marcos. Maski yung jurors, yung mga jurors dun sa kaso, tinanong sila bakit si Imelda Marcos dito, tinanong nila bakit si Imelda Marcos dito kinasuhan sa Amerika at hindi sa Pilipinas. So yun lang laging sinasabi ng mga Marcos propagandists, na si Imelda Marcos na-acquit sa Amerika. Na-acquit siya sa Amerika dahil una, hindi pinaghandaan ni Rudolph Giuliani yung kaso laban kay Imelda. Ang pinaghandaan niya yung kaso laban kay Marcos Sr. na namatay habang tinutugis doon. Pero sa Pilipinas, kinasuhan at na-convict si Imelda Marcos noong 1993. Ang kaso na final tungkol sa corruption ni Imelda Marcos at mga kasama niya sa may kinalaman sa mga ari-arian ng LRT. Yung LRT, may mga stasyon.
Yes.
Yung mga stasyon, uupahan nila.
Pinamentahan.
Ang pag-upa nila sa gobyerno, piso lang halimbawa, pero binabaliktad nila, pinapaupahan nila, sinasublease nila ng 100 piso halimbawa. So, laki ng tubo. Ang head ng grupo na yan, si Imelda Marcos, siya yung pumipirma ng kontrata.
Metro Manila Commission. Yes.
Hindi, foundation ito, supposedly.
Wow!
LRT, hindi ito government agency.
Oh my God.
Sila yung kakontrata ng gobyerno. So, unang-una, kailangan linawin ko, ang nagpo-prosecute ng mga kaso laban sa mga Marcos sa Pilipinas, hindi ang PCGG, ang nag-handle ng criminal cases. Ito yung special prosecutor sa ilalim ng ombudsman. Tumutulong ang PCGG, binibigyan namin sila ng dokumento, pero hindi kami mismo ang dapat mag-prosecute ng kaso. Pero sa ibang kaso, tumulong ako, but that's for later. Na-convict si Imelda sa Sandigan Bayan dito sa LRT case. Inakyat ni Imelda ito sa Supreme Court. nirinig ito ng isang division sa Supreme Court. Inapirma, no? The Supreme Court's division that heard the case reaffirmed the conviction of Imelda Marcos. Tapos na
Right.
sana, no? Dahil kung yung ordinaryong city treasurer nagdispalko ng pera o yung mga gumagawa ng
Tulo.
staff ang hindi kasi liit, pwede rin silang makonvict at mag-appeal sa Supreme Court, pero pag na-affirm na ng Supreme Court yung pag-convict sa kanila, guilty sila, wala na, tapos na yung kaso, kulong na
Tama.
sila. Pero dahil ito si Imelda Marcos, pinagbigyan
Nako.
ng mga alalay ni Marcos Sr. sa Supreme Court. Sino ang naglakad ng kasong ito para mapagbigyan si Imelda Marcos? Ang dating Minister of Justice ni Ferdinand Marcos, Estelito Mendoza, buhay pa hanggang ngayon,
Oh, yes.
at ginagamit pa rin ang mga tentacles, no? Network na natayo niya nung siya lang yung Minister of Justice ni Marcos for decades. Ibig sabihin siya yung in charge of the appointments of judges
Yes.
and solicitors who eventually became justices in the Supreme Court. And some of them were justices in the Supreme Court when Imelda Marcos filed a second motion for reconsideration and asked the entire Supreme Court to decide her case. Sa ilalim ng saligang batas ng Pilipinas, mahihingi mo lang sa Supreme Court na dinggin ka buong en-bank kung merong doktrina na bago na gusto mong pakinggan ng Supreme Court. Legal doctrine, hindi conviction for corruption. Pero bakit si Imelda narinig ito? Because makapangyarihan ang nakaw na yaman hanggang ngayon kahit na hindi na diktador si Marcos. Kaya na-reverse yung conviction ni Imelda Marcos. Pero na-convict uli si Imelda Marcos, alam natin lahat ito, noong 2018. Importante itong conviction na ito noong 2018. Na-convict siya dahil sa pagpapatayo niya ng ilang mga so-called Swiss at Liechtenstein businesses.
Yeah.
No? Ayokong tawagin foundation because ang alam natin yung foundation charitable. Hindi naman charitable. Sila lang yung beneficiaryo. Nagtayo siya at si Ferdinand ng mga negosyo sa Liechtenstein, isang bansa sa Europe at saka sa Switzerland. No? Kilala natin yung mga Swiss bank. Bawal yan sa ilalim ng saligang batas. Hindi pwedeng magnegosyo ang presidente at ang mga kamag-anak ng presidente sa saligang batas. Panahon pa ni Marcos hanggang tapos na si Marcos. Pero ginawa niya. Importante ito, itong kasong ito, itong criminal case, dahil ito yung kapartner ng desisyon ng Supreme Court noong 2003 pa lang. Na sinabi ng Supreme Court noong 2003, nasa PCGG ako yung namuno sa PCGG litigation in this case. Sinabi ng Supreme Court na nakaw na yaman ang mga pondong itinago ng mga Marcos sa Switzerland gamit itong mga Swiss at Liechtenstein companies na siya yung nakapangalan na may-ari ng mga nakaw na yaman. Ibig sabihin, dalawang kaso ito, isang civil, yung 2003, at tapos yung 2018 na conviction ni Imelda Marcos. Sa 2003 case, sinabi ng Supreme Court, nakaw na yaman yung $680 million na na-recover ng PCGG galing sa mga Swiss at Liechtenstein companies ni Marcos. So kung nakaw na yaman yung pera, ibig sabihin, yung act of creating the businesses, ginamit para magtago ng nakaw na yaman. Yun yung crime for which she was convicted in 2018. Now, she's already appealed this to the Philippine Supreme Court. If our Supreme Court really were to be consistent and clear and followed precedent, which is what a Supreme Court is supposed to do, no? Kailangan may consistency ka sa pagpataw mo ng mga haton. Gagamitin ng Supreme Court yung 2003 decision to say Imelda Marcos is guilty and we affirm her conviction.
Okay. Ang katanungan na lang ngayon, kasi kailangan liwanagin Tita Cecile at saka Sir Charlie at Sir Ruben, kasi yung nakaw na yaman, ang interpretasyon lang ng iba ay literal na nagnakaw sa pondo ng bayan. Nagginawa po kasi naglalabas ang pera ng Central Bank at ng Philippine National Bank. Subalit, yung paggamit ng impluensya ay upang mapalago ang negosyo is actually part of ill-gotten wealth. No? Sa aking kasi yan din yung kaso ng plunder na na-convict si Joseph Estrada sa Wete. Diba? So, ibig sabihin, yung pag-acquire ng wealth na sobra-sobra while you are sitting in office is also nakaw na yaman. Kailangan po liwanagin po natin yan.
Tsaka illegal kasi ang ginamit
Correct.
nila. Oo,
Exactly.
illegal. Ngayon, siguro ang gusto kong liwanagin, dahil bago pa, binanggit naman ni Charlie, na bago pa talaga, ito na ang sinasabing earnest effort talaga ng exiles. Dahil ako, my husband was very involved. We used to see, ako ang telephone operator or something, tumatanggap lahat ng mga dokumentong dala-dala nila hanggang kasing taas na ng mesa. Sunny as head before, ibinibigay niya nga para dahil na-expose sa media ng United States and global ang recognition nito. At ang hirap i-validate. Una, sa New York Times, sa Washington Post, takot sila dahil baka daw sila ma-charge na, mali. Pero luckily, the San Jose Mercury News, dahil it's based where there's a lot of Filipinos, picked up the story. At nanalo pa nga sila sa Pulitzer Prize. Ito gusto ko lang basahin para maintindihan nila na ang exiles ay talagang kung hindi ginamit ito at ibinigay sa PCGG, kanya nadalian ng PCGG dahil marami ng mga dokumentong na research. Ito, nung nanalo sila ng Pulitzer Prize at nagkaroon ng EDSA, ito ang sulat ni Peter Carey. This is, sandali bulag na ako. This is just to thank you 1,000 times for all the help you gave during the work on the Hidden Wealth series. I don't know what I would have done if it had not been for your encouragement, excellent information, and persistent digging. Ayan yung mga digging na ginawa ng team nila. Iba-iba, meron pa sa Caribbean, meron pa hanggang sa Australia, meron pa sa lahat. I'll never forget you for all the help. Good luck and all the best to the Philippines. At saka, binigay ito sa US Congress ng mga exiles. Hindi ba? Charlie, alam mo yan?
Yes.
Binigay yan, kanya in-examine ng US government, kausap, alam ko, nandun ako, telephone operator ako. Si Kennedy, siya ang chair noon ng GAA, ng Government Auditing Office, GAO. So siya, doon nila nakikita na kinakamkam o merong kalukuhan doon sa US aid. Napakahalaga noon. Tapos doon din sa Congress, kay Solars, sa House of Representatives, meron din ang foreign relations na ginagawa. So lumabas ito, kanya napilitan putulin ang USAID, napilitan si Marcos tumawag ng eleksyon, di niya akalain na ang mga tao ay gising at alam napakahalaga ng eleksyon. Nag-walk out ang mga computer experts dahil may mga panlolokong ginawa. Mahalagang alam lahat ito na magkakasama sa panluloko, panlilinlang at katotohanan ang dapat na mamayani. Kanya ang gagawin po natin, ipagpapatuloy, subaybayan po ninyo bukas ng gabi, pagpapatuloy pa ang paglalahad ni Charlie. Yung galing, talagang galing yan. Kung sasabihin mo magaling ba sila, magaling sa panluloko at illegal na paggawa ng pera at pagtatago, hindi ho ba? Mahalaga pong maunawaan sana yan. Hindi ho kami naninira. Ebidensya po yan, saliksikin, pakinggan ninyo bukas ng gabi, pagpapatuloy pa rin ni Charlie ang paglalahad at pagpapatuloy pa rin ang komentaryo ng ating historian. At ang maganda dito nakita niyo itong historian natin, talagang pinag-aaralan niya dahil batang-bata pa siya nung naganap ito. Hindi pa siya na nasa loob ng sinapupunan ng nanay niya nung nandyan yung kahirapan, dalamhati ng bayan nung panahon ng batas militar. Gusto kong sagutin yung sinabi ni Enrile. Show me, tell me any person who did not, that we killed or something. Diyos ko, yun lang kapatid ni Sani na pinatay nila ang daing mga kabataan na winaldas ang buhay. Hindi ho paninira ito eh. Tignan po ninyo, ito po ang pakiusap dahil ang kinabukasan ng ating bayan, ng ating mga anak, napakahalaga. Kasi sinasabi natin lalabanan ng korupsyon, kung palulusutin ang the greatest plunderer, paano ka lalaban sa korupsyon? Hindi ba? Maaari ba manglabanan ng korupsyon kung ang sinasabi natin, magnakaw ka ng bilyones, makakalusot ka. Pag mangga ang iyong kukunin, kulong ka. So mahalaga yon na ating pong alamin at pagpapatuloy po natin itong komentaryo mula po sa ating nakakaalam sa PCGG at nandyan din of course our historian at yung very well evidenced story. Hindi ho storya ito na kwentong kutsero. Itong ginagawa po ni Charlie ay batay talaga sa ebidensya. Hindi po gawa-gawa, hindi po galing sa malikot na kaisipan. Ito po ay kasaysayan. Alam po natin, di ho ba, sinasabi, pag hindi ka lumingon sa pinanggalingan, hindi ka makakarating sa paroroonan. So, ang ating pong dasal, at dinadasal yan, di ba, for a clean, honest elections. So, kung maaari po sana ay huwag ninyong kalilimutang subaybayan ang pagpapatuloy po ng pagbibigay ng malinis, matinding larawan kung paano ang galing ng panloloko, panlilinlang. At saka isang mahalagang tanong dahil tinanong ni Xiao yung tungkol sa conviction, merong maraming nagtatanong bakit daw si Junior, totoo ba na meron siyang kaso sa Amerika at talagang mahuhuli siya, Commissioner Carranza?
Totoong may kaso si Marcos Jr. sa Amerika. In fact, maraming naging kaso si Marcos Jr. sa Amerika, mga civil cases. Ibig sabihin, ito yung mga kaso na hinihingan siya ng danyos ng mga biktima ng mga paglabag ng karapatang pantao noong panahon ni Marcos. At maraming kasong final, pero lahat ito napunta sa isang korte sa Hawaii. Ang ginawa ng korte sa Hawaii, nag-award ng danyos sa mga biktima at ang award ng danyos umabot ng $2 billion. Yung total award. Everything from the calculated amount of damages to the penalties for not paying the damages. Ang nangyari dito, nung namatay si Marcos Sr. at naiwan na administrator ng mga nakaw na yaman ni Marcos Sr., si Marcos Jr. at si Imelda Marcos, sila na ngayon yung sumasagot sa utos ng Hawaii Court. Isa sa mga utos ng Hawaii Court sa mga Marcos, huwag galawin, huwag ilipat, huwag itago palalo yung mga nakaw na yaman nila dahil yun dapat ang gamitin, yun ang gustong gamitin ng mga biktima para mabayaran sila. Ang ginawa ni Imelda at ni Marcos Jr. nakipag-areglo sa Philippine government nung if I'm not mistaken 1993 at isa pang ginawa nila nag-attempt sila na magbenta ng mga painting siguro dahil kailangan nila ng pera at kailangan nilang ma-access yung cash. So yung dalawang bagay na yan, kontra yan dun sa utos ng korte na huwag galawin yung pera na gusto ring makuha ng mga biktima galing sa mga Marcos. So ang remedy diyan, no, kapag may utos ng ang korte, kahit sa ang korte sa Pilipinas o sa Hawaii, kapag may utos ng korte na wag mong gawin tapos ginawa mo, ang fina-file laban sa mga naglabag ng utos, contempt of court, no, yung binastos mo yung korte, contempt, pagbabastos. So kinasuhan sila ng contempt of court. Sinabi, they were held in contempt of court. Yun ang desisyon ng Hawaii court. They were cited in contempt. Ang contempt, kailangan mapurga mo yan. Ang tawag din ng mga abogado, to purge the contempt. Ang utos ng korte sa kanila, magbayad sila ng multa dun sa contempt. If I'm not mistaken, 100,000 a day. Dahil yun yung hindi mabawi ng mga biktima laban sa mga Marcos dahil ayaw nilang bayaran yung danyos. So lumaki yan. No? Noong 2012, umabot na yan ng something like 300 million. Yung yung penalty lang ng contempt laban kay Marcos Jr. at kay Imelda Marcos. Hindi kasama si Amy, hindi kasama si Irene dahil hindi sila co-administrator ng estate ni Marcos. Hindi sumipot si Marcos Jr. In fact, ang huling pagsipot sa pagkakaalam ko ni Marcos Jr. sa Amerika noong 2005. Bakit 2005? Yun yung pagrinig doon sa kaso na kung makokontempt ba sila o hindi. Inapila nila yung contempt. Umabot yan sa appeals court sa United States. No? At noong 2012, sinang-ayunan ng appeals court ng United States yung desisyon ng korte sa Hawaii na in contempt sila. So, sa madaling salita, kapag in contempt ang isang tao dahil sa pagbabastos niya sa isang korte, kailangan siyang pumunta sa korte, magpaliwanag. At yung paliwanag niya dapat satisfactory. Dapat kontento yung korte doon sa paliwanag niya. Kailangan ipaliwanag ni Marcos saan nandoon yung nakaw na yaman nila para magamit ito pambayad sa mga biktima. Hindi ginawa ni Marcos Jr. yan, hindi ginawa ni Imelda Marcos yan. Ayaw nilang pumunta sa Amerika, kaya kapag pumunta sila sa Amerika, dadalhin sila sa korte sa Hawaii at kapag hindi sapat ang paliwanag nila sa mga ginagawa nila mula noong 2012 pa hanggang ngayon, pwede silang ipakulong ng korte sa Hawaii.
Yeah.
Ayun. So, siguro magandang bago natin ituloy bukas ng gabi, hingan namin kayo muna ng inyong mga huling tilamsik ng diwa at inaasahan natin susubaybayan ulit tayo bukas sa pagpapatuloy ng paglalahad ni Charlie kung paano ang galaw, kilos, kung paano nagkaroon ng tinagurian nating hidden billions. So, una from Charlie, tapos kay Xiao at saka kay Commissioner Ruben.
Maraming salamat, Cecile. Maraming salamat sa ating magagaling dalawa na kasama ngayong gabi, Ben, Xiao. Inuulit ko lang yung my first sentence kanina na ang pinag-uusapan natin talaga ay tinatawag na nakaw na yaman ni Marcos na there was a science, there was a system to the Marcos art of plundering the sovereign wealth of his nation. At sa daming usap-usap, si Kadjo Bisalonga summed it up in 9 lines. At inuulit ko lang, baka may duda pa na ang linaw-linaw na sinabi ni Atty. Carranza, talagang nakaw na yaman yan. But inuulit ko lang na the authoritarianism for plunder, kaya nagkaroon ng diktadorya, upang makapagpatuloy ang kanyang pagnanakaw. Ang kanyang pagnanakaw led to dictatorship. Ang kanyang dictatorship assisted him in greater plunder. At ang techniques ng creation of monopolies and putting them under the control of cronies, awarding behest loans from government banking or financing institutions. Yung 9 techniques kanina, Yun ang gusto kong bigyan diin. Because walang duda sa pagka-illegal, immoral, at systematic na ginawa ng ni Marcos Sr. At kaya kinakailangan panalo ang Marcos Jr. at this will not go away. They want to come back with a wallop. Buhay pa si Imelda sapagkat they did this. They're guilty about this. Ang kwento-kwento, mga Talyano, mga diversion na natatawa ka. Madaming natatawa, madaming naniniwala din. Pero ang relationship ng Bangko Sentral at ng gold, ang pagdadala sa labas. May mga bills of lading na papatunay na kung bisa halos hindi baka fly out ang maliit na aeroplano to Hong Kong and from there to Switzerland. Okay, that can be controversial, but the fact is na kapag palabas sila ng madaming pera na hindi nila ma-explain. Pero na-explain natin paano nilang ginawa. Tinatawag natin in one phrase, the Marcos crony capitalist system. The Marcos crony capitalist system. At hindi pa tapos yan. And this, I know, si Atty. Carranza knows that is a challenge even to the agency where he came from. Alam mo, sa aking pag-aaral sa kasaysayan, even in the late Roman Empire, there was a distinction between sequestration and confiscation. Nung naging consultant ako sa Nicaragua kay Father Mike Discoto, they discussed this after they brought down Somoza, and they favored confiscation. Yung mga unang araw dito sa atin, malakas ang boses ko doon kina Joker at kina Kajobe na malinaw na, mayroon ng executive order number 1. Why don't we go for confiscation? Ang nangyari, kaya kami, madami sa amin nasaktan kasi may mga ibang yaman na ibalik sa ilang mayayaman na, pero ang ninakaw sa mga magsasaka, inihabilin sa 30-year fight in the courts. Which, I'm sorry to say this, I have to say it up to now, it was not fair. Kaya I keep on going back to, please let us understand the essence, the essential story of how one man like Marcos could do it. Unless we learn that it is, somebody tried it again now, recently. That's another story, but that is closely linked. And their children are running together to make sure that maganda ang control sa Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Ang Chapter 1, maganda tinulungan sila ng Amerikano sapagkat kinakailangan nun. Ngayon, tinutulungan sila ng China. So, nasaan ang karamihang tao dito? Ito ang hamon sa atin. Unang-una sa pag-intindi sa what's going on in the country. What is going on in our land. Well, anyway, kung bibigyan tayo ng pagkakataon, ma-discuss pa, I'm sure my historian and my lawyer here, tutulungan tayo to explain sa ating mga kababayan na may pag-asa kung maintindihan natin lahat. Makikilos tayo sabay-sabay, sama-sama. Maraming salamat.
To our historian, meron tanong talaga bang yung anak walang bahid ng pagkakasala? Kailangan maintindihan yun dahil yun ang ginagawang rason.
Kung tumulong po sa pagtatago ng yaman at sa pagpapanatili ng yaman, yung iba isinosoli nila, ayon sa dahil tinuutos daw ng korte, pero nakita nyo naman doon sinabi ni Sir Ruben na yung iba ay talagang pinipilit na hindi sundin ng korte, may ganyan silang playbook. Makikita natin na complicit, mayroon siyang kinalaman doon, In a way, kung hindi ho, tulad na nabanggit ni Sir Ruben, kung hindi ho, ang pinakamadaling gawin dyan, no, ay ibalik yung mga nasa kanila pa ng mga assets. That's one. No? Number two, bilang isang historian, kailangan makita natin na why do people believe in stories of gold? Diba? Kasi hindi nasasagot yung mga basic na ng maraming administrasyon, no, na sinikap namang sagutin, kaso kulang pa rin yung pangangailangan ng tao, yung kaginhawaan ng Pilipinas. Kaya patuloy tayong naniniwala sa mga kwentong ginto. At nakakalungkot yun sapagkat hindi natin mararating ang gininto ang kinabukasan kung ang ating kasaysayan ay ating kakalimutan. Patuloy yung cycle na kung dati ay nagkaroon ng plunder on a massive scale, tapos bagamat sa pagsisikap ng PCGG ng pamahalaan, nahirapan pa rin tayong kunin lahat. No? Hindi pa, less than half pa yung nakukuha natin. Yung iba, yung more than half, hindi pa natin nakukuha na ibabalik. Ito'y naging signal sa iba pa na pwede ko rin gawin yun ng mas malakihan pa at mas maramihan pa. Yan po ang nakakalungkot sa atin dahil hindi ho natin ina-acknowledge ang mga pains ng ating nakaraan. So sana po harapin natin yung mga masasakit na katotohanan sa ating kasaysayan.
Ngayon naman pakinggan natin ang mga tilamsik ng diwa ni Ruben Carranza, Attorney Ruben Carranza, dating PCGG Commissioner.
Hindi madaling i-summarize yung laki ng nakaw na yaman na ninakaw ng mga Marcos. Nagkaroon sila ng 20 taon para magnakaw. At pagkatapos ng 20 taon, nagkaroon pa sila ng mahabang panahon para itago ang ninakaw at patuloy na pahirapan ang gobyerno kasama ang PCGG sa pagbawi ng mga ninakaw nila. Pero ang isa sigurong ehemplo na makikita ng mga Pilipino kung gaano kalalim yung plano talaga ni Ferdinand Marcos na magnakaw, isa sa mga tinayo niyang negosyo, ang tawag Arelma. Itinayo niya ito sa Liechtenstein at nag-utos na magkaroon ng account sa Switzerland, si Marcos. Pagkatapos, yung Arelma sa Switzerland at Liechtenstein, nagtayo naman ng isa pang negosyo sa Panama na ang pangalan Arelma din. So, meron kang dalawang Arelma, isa sa Europa, isa sa Panama. Nag-utos si Marcos na magbukas ng bank account ang Arelma sa Panama, magbukas ng bank account sa New York, sa Merrill Lynch, isang bangko dito sa New York. No? Sa tapat ko lang yan, ang New York City. Anong araw inutos ni Marcos na mag-open ng bank account ang Arelma sa New York, yung kanyang negosyo sa Panama? September 21, 1972. Sino yung beneficiary ng Arelma account sa Merrill Lynch? Aside from Marcos Sr., si Marcos Jr. at yung dalawa pang anak at sa Imelda Marcos. Ilang taon si Marcos Jr. nung binuksan ang Arelma account sa New York? 15 anyos, 15 years old. Bata pa, hindi alam ni Marcos Jr. na may mga ganitong pangyayari. Hindi alam ni Marcos Jr. na yung $2 million na yun ang opening amount para pagbukas ng Arelma account sa New York, galing pala dun sa ninakaw ni Marcos mula sa Japanese War Reparations. No? Sa danyos na binigay ng Japan sa Pilipinas dahil sa World War II. Hindi alam ni Marcos Jr. dahil 15 anyos lang siya, nasa high school lang siya. Pero yung Arelma, nabawi lang ng Pilipinas noong 1998. Kasama sa mga bumawi, pumunta sa Panama para bawiin yung Arelma account. Ngayon, Chief Justice na ng Supreme Court, si Alexis Mundo, who was a PCGG Commissioner. He personally went to Panama, showed the document, and gained control of Arelma. Noong 1998, ilang taon na si Marcos Jr.? 51 years old. So ibig sabihin mula 15 anyos hanggang 51 anyos, nakinabang si Marcos Jr. sa Arelma account. Hindi lang naman Arelma yung account na binuksan ng mga Marcos. No? Naka-14 foundation dun sa isang kaso lang, 2003 decision. So maraming pakinabang si Marcos Jr. sa ill-gotten wealth, sa nakaw na yaman. Pero kung pakinabang lang, pero meron ka ng pwedeng kaso, accessory after the fact ang tawag dyan. No? Ikaw yung nakinabang, pero hindi lang siya nakinabang, nakitago siya dun sa nakaw na yaman. Siya ngayon yung susi, sa kanya iniwan ni Marcos Sr. yung susi sa pagbukas ng mga ill-gotten wealth, accomplished na siya. Ibig sabihin, kasama siya sa patuloy na pagnanakaw at pagtatago sa nakaw na yaman. Kung gusto ni Cecile or ni Xiao or kahit si Charlie, pwedeng sampahan ng kaso si Marcos Jr. ng money laundering before the Anti-Money Laundering Council of the Philippines. As a matter of fact, any Filipino citizen should be able to do that even during an election year, or especially during an election year. So, siguro yan lang ang panghuli kong sasabihin, no? Na hindi pa tapos ang laban sa mga Marcos, at ang election isa lang sa mga paraan na labanan ang mga Marcos. Marami pang larangan na pwedeng gamitin para talunin ang mga Marcos. Natalo sila noong 1986. Natalo uli sila ilang beses. Natalo sila noong 2016. Bakit hindi sila kayang talunin sa 2022?
Napakagandang salita yan na nagbibigay ng pag-asa na kahit na kailan, huwag tayong mawawalan ng tiwala na magwawagi ang tama at katwiran at ipatuloy na ipaglaban ang katotohanan, kalayaan at pagtatanggol sa demokrasya. Kanya napakaganda po ng ating usapan. Sana nga ay higit na naliwanagan ng ating mga mamamayan. Hindi po paninira ito kung hindi paglalahad ng katotohanan. At sabi nga ni Bishop Socrates, to tell the truth, you must be having the courage to know there will be confrontation. Dahil siyempre meron yung hindi papayag sa katotohanan na inilalahad. Ngunit mahalaga po ang kasaysayan, kanya meron po tayong pagbibigay ng alaala, pagyugyug ng alaala, pagyugyug ng konsyensya na kung minsan ay kinakalawang. Napakahalaga po ang ating usapan at siguro lalo na ngayong panahon ng paggunita ng EDSA, marami pa pong maaring mapag-usapan o higit na mabigyan pa ng linaw para malaman talaga ang katotohanan. Unang-unang panlilin lang, yung sasabihin dahil kailangan labanan ang komunista, kaya nagdeklara ng martial law. Alam po natin na nagdeklara ng martial law, ginamit ito na instrumento para manatili sa posisyon o sa poder. Dahil sabi ho ng konstitusyon, hindi na pwedeng tumakbo uli. 2 terms lang noon. Yun ang umpisa. Meron paglilin lang saliksikin po natin. Pati si Defense Minister Enrile, anong sabi niya? O sinabi ni Marcos, na-ambush siya. Kanya isa yun sa mga rason para magbatas militar. Pagkatapos nung nanalo na ang people power, natakwil ang diktadorya, peke yung ambush. Ngayon nakabalik na, totoo yung ambush. Ano ang totoo? Hindi ho ba? Kailangan talaga tayo ay nag-iisip at patuloy ang dasal natin. Maraming salamat kay Charlie na mabuti na lang ay nandiyan pa na living witness ng team na nag-umpisa nitong research. At lahat po inaalala natin, halos pumanaw na lahat ng ating mga kasamahan. Ako po ay lalahad lamang ng katotohanan dahil naiisip ko kung buhay po si Sunny, nakatindig po siya para sabihin ang katotohanan. At kailangan po na manindigan tayo para sa katotohanan. The worst crime that is being imposed now is amnesia on our nation. Wag nating hayaan yan. Ang tanging gamot sa lason na yan ay katotohanan. At salamat sa ating mga kasama ngayong gabi. At huwag niyong kalimutan, bukas rin ng gabi, si Charlie Avila, ang ating history professor Xiao Chua, and our courageous PCGG former Commissioner Ruben Carranza. Mabuti na lang at meron siyang memory bank ng kung paano meron talagang nakaw na yaman, at dapat ang dasal natin ibalik na yan. Baka sakaling magkaroon ng tulay for some kind of rapprochement. Hindi golden years ang naganap noon. Meron pong lungkot, dalamhati, paghihirap na naganap sa ating bansa. Ngunit meron din pong napakagandang pagtatapos na pinakita ng Pilipino, ang tapang, ang kagitingan, mapayapang na itakwil ang diktadurya. So mabuhay po ang Pilipinas at stay safe and healthy. Charlie, Xiao, and Ruben.
Thank
Salamat
you.
po.
Okay, thank
Bye.
you. Oo.
Sir Ruben, sorry,
Okay.
huli na lang. Sir Ruben, saglit.
Sige.
2 questions lang. Nasaan yung
sige.
original documents ng yung William Saunders na nahanap sa Malacanang? Nasaan yan?
Ay, Bong, kunin mo nga ito. Kunin mo
I
yung
don't
tanong
know.
tsaka sagot.
It's possible na walang original in the sense na, paper copy, because ang pinakamabilis answer, ang Swiss banks microfiche yung system of recording, of storing documents. So that's the original. No? Sila yung meron dahil
Sila yung
this is
meron.
a Credit Suisse bank document. So kung meron mang kopya sa Pilipinas, it will be in the PCGG's library. And then we did try to digitize all of that. Hindi natapos dahil kulang sa pondo, but yung actual paper original would be in Switzerland. There will be a microfiche copy in Switzerland. And then any other version is a copy of the microfiche printout.
Sayang hindi ko nasabi
I have
na kami ang
mahaba rin ang
66th Street. Nakatakot-takot na reyna at saka hari at prinsipe at prinsesa sila sa mga pictures doon sa paintings na naiwan sa 66th Street. Sayang.
Tapos last one, yung mga alahas wala na, na-auction na lahat. Everything.
No,
Oo.
there were three
Andiyan
sets yung
pala
alahas.
si Tina. Oh. Tina, you should
three.
listen to this. You should keep this for your historical, anong pangalan nun? Yung memorial, yung ginagawa. The revelation, Tina is with the survivors,
Yes.
survivors
Hello po, ma'am.
group.
Hi, Xiao.
Sir Ruben, wait.
Ruben.
Last na lang,
Three
bago
sets
ko
yung
umalis.
three sets yung jewelry collections, no? Yung isa yung US Customs. Yun yung nabalik sa Pilipinas. Nabalik sa Pilipinas dahil hindi na tumutol si Imelda na ibalik. Dahil of course they were pressured by the US government to surrender, otherwise they wouldn't be able to stay, no? So nabalik yan. I think hindi ko matandaan kung na-auction ba yan or it's still in the central bank, but it's in the
So
possession of
the
Philippines.
central bank is keeping the jewelry.
Jewelry.
Okay.
Yeah, and then
Gets.
may Malacanang jewelry collection, which is the smallest of the jewelry collections in terms of value. Yun, definitely nasa central bank. And then the third one, which is the largest in terms of value, yung Romeliotes collection,
Romeliotes.
Greek jeweler, na because tumakas sa Pilipinas pero nahuli sa customs ng Pilipinas. Kinasuhan. Yan yung may Supreme Court decision in 2017, very recent, that finally decided that the Romeliotes, gusto kasing makuha ni Imelda yan. So nilabanan talaga niya yan. 2017, the Supreme Court said it's ill-gotten base doon sa 2003 decision. Wala kasing, sabi ng Supreme Court, the only legitimate money that the Marcos spouses have is $304,000 1965 to 1986. Yun lang yung dineclare nila na income as president and then later on Metro Manila governor. So anything else above that, yun yung importansya ng 2003 decision. Anything else above $304,000 is ill-gotten.
Yan. Thank you so much. Sorry for the addendum, pero matagal ko nang gustong itanong yung mga dokumento. Thank you. Sir, ingat po
Okay.
kayo lahat.
Bye-bye.
Charlie.
Thank you.
Tina.
Si Tina naman ang